Hello everyone, I am Varun Yadav, Senior Cloud Engineer here at Oracle, and in this video I'm going to show you how you can implement tool-led OAuth in API Gateway. Tool-led OAuth, also known as the client credential flow, is a simplified version of OAuth that's used when an application needs to access resources on its own behalf rather than on behalf of a user. You might want to use tool-led OAuth in scenarios like server-to-server communication, background processes, or batch job, APIs that don't involve user-specific data. So with that, let's break down the flow for our implementation. So here we are using Postman for the client, and we will create two client applications here in IAM. One for the client application, another one for the resource server application. And finally, we will use API Gateway to get our data back from the backend. So the first step is Postman will request the token from the IAM, and we will pass information like client ID, client secret. We will use the grant type of client credential, and also we will pass the scope. So once that request is successful, we'll get back the access token. And after getting the access token, we will call the actual API with the access token information. And in our API gateway, we will configure the authentication in such a way where it can validate that token using JWKS. And if it is successful, then it will send back the response response payload back to the Postman. So in a nutshell, this is what tool-led OAuth implementation looks like. And now I will show you how we can actually implement this, and then we can test this scenario. I am in my API gateway homepage. I'll go to the gateways and I'll open one of the deployment. So for example, if I want to add authentication for this particular deployment, I'll click on this, click on edit, and then I'll go to authentication. Here I can select single authentication, and my authentication type will be OAuth 2.0/OpenID Connect. And the token location, I can select header, the name of the token, authorization, and the authentication schema I can put bearer. Now in the validation type, we have few options. One is OAuth 2.0 introspection endpoint, another one is remote JWKS, and third one is static key. For this example, I'll choose remote JWKS. For this, we will provide the JWKS URL where we can get that validation. And if you want to use static key, that will be a little bit faster than remote JWKS because we will upload the key over here so that it doesn't have to call the URL to do this validation. But we'll stick with the remote JWKS, and I'll show you where we can get this JWKS URL. So if we go to the hamburger menu, go to identity and security, and go to the domains. Now I'll choose the root compartment. I'll use the default domain or my current domain. And you can see there is a domain URL. We'll copy that, come back to the API gateway, and I'll paste that over here. And at the end, you see there is 443 port. We'll remove that, and at the end, we'll replace that with the endpoint for signing certificate JWK. So I'll paste the information where did I get that from in the description box. But after pasting, we'll checkbox disable SSL verification, and for the issuer, we'll select identity.oraclecloud.com. And audience will be simply the URL that we want to keep. So for that, we need to get the API gateway URL, and I can simply open API gateway in a new tab. Now I can copy the endpoint and paste that in the audience, right? I can add multiple audience. For example, if I want to add the final API gateway URL, I can add it over here. So that is my products. And I don't want any claim validation, so I'll click no. And what should happen in terms of like, if the request is not successful. So we'll leave it default HTTP 401 unauthorized. If you want, there is a redirect URL we can provide, or we can use custom response as well, right? So that's pretty much it that we need to do on the API gateway side. We'll click next, and save this. It seems there is a error in the authentication. Let's check that. I think we need to remove this claim validation. We'll click cancel. Okay. All right. So while this is updating, what we will do is, like in our IAM, we need to create two integrated application, one for the client side and one for the resource server. So let's go to the domain that I have open in another tab, and here I'll go to integrated application, right? First, we'll create application, confidential application, and this will be our resource server. So I can simply say API gateway resource server, and I don't want to do anything over here. I'll simply click next, and in the resource server configuration, I'll select configure this application as a resource server now. And for the primary audience, this will be again our API gateway. So I'll simply copy the URL for our endpoint, come back over here, paste that, and I'll add the scope. So the scope is nothing but our actual deployment or the actual route for the deployment. So I can say like /products, and I can give a display name or any description. So I can say and click add. Click next and finish. So this is created. As you can see, this is inactive right now. We'll click on activate to activate this application. And now we'll go back to the integrated application, one page back, add another application, another confidential application, and we'll give it a name for client's application. So instead of resource server, I'll now say client app. I'll leave all the fields empty. Click next. Here I want to do a client configuration now, and we want to checkbox client credential because that is what we will pass from the Postman to get the access token. And down here add resource, and here in the resource we'll add scope. So we'll search for our resource server application that we just created. I simply can paste the name and it comes up over here. Click add, and you can see in the scope it already have that path URL. All right, click next and then click finish. This is also inactive, so we'll click activate to activate this application. So now this application is active. Let's go back to our API gateway to see if our API gateway is active. It is. Now we can test this API gateway deployment using Postman, and we can verify whether the authentication is working as expected or not. So in Postman, I have pasted the URL for the API gateway, and we have selected no auth. I'll click send, and you should see that we are getting 401 unauthorized. Now we need to configure the Postman to get the access token, and then we can pass that access token to hit our API to get the response back. So we'll select OAuth 2.0, and if I scroll down, I have few configuration, but I'll show you how we can do that. So to get the access token, we need to pass the access token URL. This will be our domain URL, and at the end we need to add OAuth2/v1/token to get the access token. And for the client ID and client secret, we can get this information from our client application that we created. From our API gateway client app, I can copy the client ID, I'll copy the secret, and scope we need to pass as well. So I'll copy the scope from the client application. So I copy the scope, I'll paste it over here, and over here you can see client type is client credential. So we'll go down and we'll say get new access token, and it says authentication complete. Proceed. We want to save this token, so I can say API gateway demo and then click on use token. So now if I go to the top of this, here you can see the token. We have selected our API gateway token. The token information is over here and the prefix is bearer. So now if we click send, we should be able to see our response coming back. And as you see, we are getting 200 students with the response back. I will show you another example how we can communicate between Visual Builder and API Gateway and how we can use this authentication piece that we have just implemented. So in Visual Builder, I'll go to service connection and I'll click the backend, and here I'll add the custom backend, and for the title I'll give API Gateway. Click next, and I'll paste the URL for our API Gateway. Now for the authentication, I'll select OAuth 2.0 client credential, and here I'll configure the client ID and secret, and we will pass scope and token URL. Now we will create this backend. Now I will create service connection for this backend that we have just created. And I'll click next and go to the test tab, and I'll make sure that the method is get, and I'll click send request. And as you can see, we are getting back our data successfully from the API gateway. So this is it for this demo. I hope you find this video helpful, and keep in mind this is just an example of how we can implement tool like OAuth for API gateway and how we can consume the multiple applications. Thanks for watching.